I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon. This is episode number 217, and today in the show, I'm joined by Charles Post, Tyler Sharp, and Brad Neathery to discuss their new publication, Modern Huntsman, and the question of how we represent and communicate our hunting lifestyle. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. And today in the show, we've got an interesting and particularly unique episode. I think it's a real thinker, I'd say. We're joined in this one, as I mentioned a second ago, by three guys who are involved in the publishing of a new premium print magazine called Modern Huntsman. And this publication is taking a really unique angle on hunting with a focus on framing most of their content in a way that it's more catered towards non-hunters or brand new hunters, or maybe folks that have been intrigued by hunting by way of the local food movement, that type of thing. And what's interesting is, at least from this team's perspective, much of the traditional hunting media available in the past hasn't necessarily spoken very well to these aforementioned groups. And let's be honest, I think that if you took your non-hunting urban friend from work and stuck them in front of the TV to watch some big buck TV show or gave them a copy of a popular deer hunting magazine, do you think that they'd resonate with that material? Do you really think they'd be intrigued to get involved after seeing dozens of pictures of big dead deer and articles about kinetic energy and food plots? Or what about after watching a guy fist pumping and hooting and hollering in a tree after shooting a deer? I think that while many of us within the hunting community might enjoy that kind of stuff, I think it is easy to see how this might not appeal as much to those on the outside looking in. But that's left this big gap between much of the content being produced and then the needs of a growing audience of people that are interested in hunting, maybe, but they're not knowing what to do with that intrigue. So that's where these guys, Brad, Tyler, and Charles, come in and their new project, Modern Huntsman. So today on the show, we chat with these guys about their inspiration for this new project and then the different issues that they're trying to address with this work. Stuff like how hunters communicate about hunting and the importance of improving the non-hunting world's perception of hunters and our role as hunters and conservationists moving forward into the future, and just a whole lot more than that. And within this group, it's interesting because we have a relatively recently converted non-hunter to hunter. We have a professional photographer and hunter and videographer. We have a former vegetarian and ecologist and filmmaker. So needless to say, it's a conversation packed with just really unique ideas and opinions and perspectives, which are sometimes right in line with the things we typically talk about in the hunting world, and sometimes quite different. So without further ado, let's take a quick break to thank our partners at Whitetail Properties, and then we'll get right to the episode. So as we've mentioned on many past episodes, Whitetail Properties and their land specialists, in addition to being a go-to option for those interested in buying or selling recreational properties, they're also a great resource when it comes to learning more about hunting or managing land for wildlife. And their YouTube series called Landbeat is a perfect example of this. And just this week, they launched a new video about the value of working with a forester when developing a land management plan. And we've discussed this on past episodes. The fact that how properly managing timber on a piece of ground can really benefit the wildlife, on your property, but knowing how to do this in the right way and how you can possibly financially benefit from too, that's important to know before getting started. And that's what this video shares. It talks about exactly how a forester can help you do that. So if you're in a situation like this where land and timber management is on your horizon, but you're not exactly sure where to start or what to do next, I definitely recommend heading over to the Whitetail Properties YouTube channel and checking out this recent video, which is titled, quite poetically, I might add, Make Money on Your Timber, Consulting a Forester, What You Need to Know. I don't know if that's a haiku or something, but it is a helpful short video, so check it out. And now, on to the show. All right, with me now, we've got a full house. I've got Brad, Tyler, and Charles all with me. And rather than beating around the bush, Brad, I wanted to start with you. Being the founder of Modern Huntsman, can you just set the stage for us? What is this? Why did you create this? How did the idea come about?
Absolutely. So the whole concept started, my background is as a non-hunter, and not necessarily somebody who had never hunted, but somebody who really didn't associate with hunters in general. There was this disconnect with how I felt about hunting and the way that I engaged in the land. I was a meat eater, and I grew up in Texas, and so hunting really isn't a negative topic here. It's just kind of if you do it, great. If you don't, great. And so, given the luxury of choice between the grocery store and the field, I kind of felt like I was a more responsible human because I bought my meat rather than killing more animals, and that was a pretty accepted way of thinking. But it was about 5 years ago that I was really introduced with a topic from a hunter who kind of poked and questioned, if you eat meat and you're somebody who appreciates the outdoors, you're somebody who is, for wildlife conservation, what is it about you that pushes you away from hunting? And it was a question that I had to wrestle with, and had to kind of force myself to give some thought to. And what I came up with was, it wasn't that I was necessarily opposed to hunting, because, I'd grown up about once a year, Dad and I would go out in the field and go dove hunting, and just to be together as father and son. It was not at all to be a serious hunter by any means. We'd just be together. And so when I was proposed, when I was given the question, I had to really think through, why I was against it. So it wasn't that I was against hunting, but there was more so this image that I had. When somebody were to say, that they are a hunter, I almost put this image in my head, and I didn't want to be that. I didn't really know why. I just didn't want to be that. So when I had to really wrestle with the question, what I came up with was, there's a perception of hunting and hunters in America that really turns off the non-hunters. The rest of America, that quantifiably there's 67% of people in America who are agnostic to hunting. They eat meat. They have an appreciation for wildlife. They've just never really been presented with hunting, and they've never really haven't had a good opportunity to understand what hunting is all about. So, as an entrepreneur and a serial creator, I couldn't let this pass. And so I thought, man, I've got to create something that starts to open up hunting to non-hunters and gives them a reason to see this the way that I've seen this, and shown kind of a new direction and a new vision in this. And it really starts with the creatives and brands and organizations inside the industry that are telling the story in a way that's both approachable and aspirational to everybody who's really only seen, kind of the one-sided, which is not objectively wrong, but the camo mindset. And so there was a lot of creatives in the space who were coming at it from a much more not romantic perspective, but honest perspective. And this story in a much larger format that I was able to digest and feel a connection to. And so I started an Instagram channel called Modern Huntsman, and started to curate content from photographers and filmmakers and brands and organizations who I felt were distributing this media in a way that felt good, felt the way that I believe hunters feel whenever they hunt. And so in doing that, we started to build this channel, me and my partner early on. And when we got to a point of about 5 weeks after we started the channel, we had about 5,000 followers. And it was like, okay, this is real, and this is a need in the industry. And the majority of the people that were following us were actually non-hunters. So in light of that, I knew that this needed to expand out further. So fate happened, and I met Tyler, who had this vision that I had, but he has a totally different background as regard to being a hunter and a filmmaker, photographer. So I met him, and we shared this similar vision and this similar approach to create a platform that we could present to both the hunting and the non-hunting communities that would conversation. I'll let Tyler take it from here.
Yeah, so without taking too much time on my background, I mean, I'm a photographer, writer, and director, and I've been working in the outdoor industry for the last 12 years. And a lot of the culmination of my frustration with my experience in the hunting industry and with from without the hunting industry has kind of led to this. And the first time Brad and I met about 3 years ago, he kind of told me about what he was wanting to do, but wasn't sure which direction to take it. And I said, hey, I know this is going to sound weird because we just met, but what you're describing is probably going to be my life's work, and you need to hire me as your creative director right now. And he was like, okay, well, let's finish this coffee and we can talk about it. And so, I just, I traveled all over the world filming for several different hunting shows, and just kind of had a little more of a traditional view of the hunting industry. And part of my frustration with that was that even though there are a lot of people who are dedicated conservationists, ethical hunters, in most cases, they are talking to a room full of members of the same club. And they say, hey, we all believe this, right? And everybody says, yeah. But then when that conversation leaves the room and it is applied to a non-hunting public, it ceases to become productive, and it often becomes a conflict. And so that was half of my frustration. And the other half of my frustration was when I would come back from places in Africa or Russia or Pakistan or wherever on hunts, and my friends and family who don't have an insight into hunting's role in conservation, they would get often emotional or upset at me for things that they've read online that aren't true about animals being threatened that aren't, or just the way hunting actually works, or having this perception of what a trophy hunter is. And so those two things combined, for the last 10 or 12 years, I've really wanted to find a way to improve both of those situations, find a way to help hunters communicate to a non-hunting public in a way that's less aggressive and less exclusive, and then vice versa, find ways to educate the public about hunting's role in conservation, that there are people who conduct themselves in a much more ethical and honorable way than what you might see in sensationalized news headlines or Facebook posts and all that kind of stuff. And so we sort of came to the conclusion that we needed to produce a magazine, and that led to volume 1 of Modern Huntsman. And so it's a 204-page book with no ads, and Brad and I kind of handpicked all the people we wanted to have involved. And from the very beginning, it became clear that our number one recruit would be Mr. Charles Post, who I believe to be a unicorn in the hunting world. And so him and I are now working together to move into volume 2 of Modern Huntsman to try to achieve these goals. But I'll use that, let Charles give you a little bit of his background.
Oh, too kind, Tyler. Yeah, so I guess to fill the shoes of the unicorn that I've been offered. My background's a bit interesting in that I did grow up hunting. My father was a hunter. He was also kind of a lifelong conservationist. He was on the board of California Trout. My grandfather was a Harvard-trained forester who also hunted wolves in Minnesota back when there was a bounty on them. So I grew up staying at their place in Virginia, and the wolf skins were the blankets we had in the rooms we stayed in. So it's kind of this weird thing where I grew up in California, in Marin County, which is an incredibly liberal part of the state. Ended up pursuing an undergraduate and a graduate degree at UC Berkeley, studying ecology there. Berkeley's, for better or for worse, probably one of the most liberal institutions on earth. But it gave me this really interesting dual perspective of hunting, of stewardship, conservation, and also, a really close connection to, a largely non-hunting world. There definitely are hunters in Central and Northern California, but I think the overwhelming population of the Bay Area is frankly pretty disconnected from the hunting community and the hunting world. So I kind of straddled this line of, 1 foot in each camp. I understand the far right and I understand the far left, and I've spent a lot of time, kind of rubbing shoulders with friends and family and peers who identify in both places. But, when Tyler and Brad, kind of sprouted this modern huntsman idea, it was something that felt right. It was something that, I think couldn't have come at a better time, because for me, what my life's work and my passion, really kind of orbits this idea of stewardship and this reality that now more than ever, we need to get people outside and we need to build bridges as opposed to illuminating these points of conflict or these perceived points of conflict. And, while I really appreciate, Brad's comment about, or Tyler's comment about people talking about hunting, being in these kind of island situations where everybody echoes, kind of the same perspective. And then you leave and enter the public realm and people don't really understand the lexicon or don't understand the pursuit or the passion. I think one of the things that's interesting here is that not only do we need to change that narrative, but also realize that if we can focus on hunting as a group of people that does have a best and could be better end of the spectrum, we should be focusing on those best case examples of stewardship, of people who are hunting for the right reasons. Because just like there are vegans who take it too far, there are vegans who do a mindful job. And I think hunting's not perfect. And I think one of the things that excites me about Modern Huntsman, this opportunity, is that we can profile and celebrate and uplift those best stories that show that hunting is not killing, it's hunting. And hunting, you could be a deer hunter and never harvest a deer. And by virtue of being a hunter, you care about nature. And now more than ever, we need people to care about these natural spaces. So I think it's a very timely effort, and it's an exciting one. I think issue 1 really set the stage for us to really dive into issue 2, and I couldn't be more proud to be a part of what lies ahead.
Yeah, it's exciting, I think, for me from the outside looking in too, because a lot of your guys' concerns and some of the different things that led you to create this have been things that have been on my mind a lot too, and it's something I think about a lot and talk about a lot, that being, how do we as a hunting community better represent ourselves? How do we better engage the non-hunting public, welcome those who are interested in joining us, and for those who aren't interested but are kind of on the fence, at least present a positive representation of what we're doing and don't give people really easy, stupid reasons to think those stereotypes are true. But to your point earlier, Tyler, that being that lots of times us in the hunting community, especially those of us who grew up doing this, who don't know anything else, again, we're in this echo chamber where we just talk to each other and we don't ever or don't often think about what things look like from the outside. But we're still posting things on Facebook or Instagram or on TV shows that sometimes the rest of the world sees. Many times us not realizing what they're seeing and them not realizing what we're seeing because there's not that shared context. So my question for you, maybe first, Brad, given how you led this off, the fact that you were a non-hunter, but you were turned off by this perception of what a hunter was or what the stereotype of a hunter was. I'm curious from your guys' perspective, what are those things that turned you off? What are the things you saw or the things you heard, or what actually flesh out what that negative connotation was that turned you off to hunting, because I think it's helpful for those in the hunting community who maybe don't think about this to hear from someone like you to understand, oh wow, maybe I was saying things in this way. I never thought that someone would be, seeing that in a different way than I did. So that's my long and rambling way of saying, can you share some examples?
Absolutely. And I want to answer this question softly and be very cautious about how I approach this, because it's not an objective person or a stance. It's more of how it's perceived. Because what I've come to learn, from my background in non-hunting and not having a lot of interaction with hunters, is that the way that I perceive this person, I'll kind of get into that in just a second, this person, when I talk to them, they're different. Right, the way that they interact with me and they talk about wildlife and they talk about the experience that they had hunting or what it is for them, and oftentimes it is something they grew up with, right? That they went out with their dad and their granddad, or maybe their mom and their grandmother, and this is a way of life. It's just the way that I thought about, literally is the way that they thought about hunting, and I had to kind of digest that and realize that this is a way of life for so many people around me, my friends and family. It's not just people on the outside. But the stereotype that I had in my mind was more so something that I'd seen on social media, and I think everybody can kind of relate to it. And it's just that kind of blood aggressive photo of, the misinterpretation, the misunderstanding of what a trophy hunt might look like. And it's the aggressive, way of the, holding up the bloody head of a whitetail, and it's got his tongue hanging out. And it's just a poor representation. And it's only one snapshot of what the full experience was. And that's something that, with my background in kind of the creative industry and really understanding, like, how do we tell stories that are going to connect and convey a much more honest and beautiful depiction of whatever it is that we're talking about, people get one moment to try and identify and understand with a culture. And if it's a culture that they're unfamiliar with, and especially one like this where it's got so much political intensity and it's got so many people that are against it, we get one chance often to show a representation of what we believe. And if that one representation is the twisted neck of a bloody whitetail, it's not the story. And I know that this is something that is not going to be solved overnight, right? We're not going to be able to release one issue of a publication that is going to inspire and invigorate a new type of sharing either stories or content on social media. But what I hope to do, what we have all collectively worked so hard to create, is a way to kind of spearhead and lead a generation of people into conveying and representing hunting in a way that is both honorable and respectful towards the wildlife and the land, and also inspiring and aspirational towards those who may have never even given hunting a second thought.
And I'm gonna. Well, go ahead. Did you have a question?
No, I was gonna toss it to you, Charles or Tyler. So I would love to hear what you have to add.
Yeah, this is Tyler. I'm gonna jump in here. So yeah, I think that my answer is kind of twofold. To piggyback on what Brad said, I think that for me, being deeply embedded in the traditional hunting industry, there were times where I'd be out on hunts, and you don't always agree with people, right? You may there's in the same way that we could all agree on virtues, right? Honesty, courage, bravery, loyalty. Those are all things that we can agree are good on a moral scale. Well, I would like to think that there are also similar virtues in hunting that we're trying to represent through modern huntsmen and the stories we tell and the people we involve. But not everybody adheres to those. And unfortunately, the conversation, as Charles said, about this traditional fight of the right versus the left. Well, if you're not fully with us, you're against us. And if you don't sign up for the, super right wing, then you're a liberal communist hippie. And I found myself in situations where I didn't agree with someone because I felt like they were using buzzwords like conservation when they really weren't, in fact, a conservation-minded person. They just wanted to kill something. And unfortunately, the way that the fight and the conflict and that conversation has become, you're either you're in one camp or the other. And so we felt that there was kind of a large population of people who live quiet lives, who live in an ethical, hunting standard, or are dedicated conservationists, or really just hunt for their own meat because it's part of their budget, and it's just part of their lifestyle passed down through generations. That we felt that group of people wasn't being really represented at all, and definitely not fairly represented. And so, Brad sort of stumbled upon that by accident with the Instagram channel, and it has been a booming echo that it is indeed much needed, that there are a lot of people who don't agree with magazines say, or the big brands who are more focused on selling product than they are about the actual preservation of a hunting tradition. And so we're trying to focus on that stuff. With non-hunters, I'm trying to really listen to what they have to say. And as you mentioned, what do they think about what we post? And I think that that's one of the main points I'm trying to make about hunters is we have to be very wary of the power of images and how quickly information can spread for good or online, and what that can do to either improve the perception of hunting or do further damage, because a lot of damage has been done, and there's a lot of images out there that can't be removed. And so we're trying to show that there's a different way, and that there's a different demographic of people that represent what we feel are the main virtues of what hunting is supposed to be. And through that, the tone we've taken and the sensitivity that we're showing towards people who are not hunters has worked. And there are a lot of people who've ordered this magazine who were either vegans or non-hunters. And I just talked with a young lady the other day from California who literally told me, I read your magazine and was so inspired that I signed up for a hunting camp in Washington. And she went up and learned how to hunt and shot her first turkey and harvested it. And she said it's the most amazing experience of her life. And she may not be a hardcore hunter, but what we did directly caused her to become interested. I think that the conclusion there is that when people who aren't hunters realize that they can be, quote, a hunter, or they can provide some food for themselves, maybe a couple times a year, a deer or a turkey or a wild hog, and they don't have to sign up for the rest. They don't have to sign up for the gear and the camo and the hunting conventions and all that they can live their life in a way that feels, rewarding and is more connected with the land, and that's something that they can do on their own terms, and that we can help them find access to opportunities, information. The reaction has been really positive.
So let me present a different perspective, playing devil's advocate here, because I agree with everything you guys are saying, and what I'm going to present to you, I fundamentally disagree with. But this is something that even when I talk about this kind of stuff, sometimes you'll hear this response. You'll say, why do I need to care about what these other people think? Or why should we want more non-hunters to get into hunting? There's not enough spots to hunt as it is. I don't need more competition. Or why should I cater to some yuppie over in this place who doesn't get me at all? Blah, 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 blah. You'll hear that kind of response from people. What would your response to that be?
So I'm going to give a real quick response, and then I want Charles to jump in. My surface level response to that would be because we now live in an age where there are legislative opportunities, votes that come up about access to public lands that the general public or people who might be against hunting have a say in. And if we continue to combat those people and treat them as people whose opinion don't matter, that's going to come back to bite us in the ass. And we could potentially lose access or hunting rights as a result. And I'm gonna throw the ball to Charles there.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, Tyler, and Mark, that's a really an interesting question. I think what comes to mind for me, and to kind of add to a little bit of what Tyler started off introducing, is that most of the public land in America is not Instagram famous, is not showing up in a Chris Burkhardt feed or in a Nat Geo feed. The places that people harvest, some of the best mule deer in Nevada or Utah, or some of the best elk units in Montana. These aren't places that people are going to hike and camp and take, photos by the lake. So those are just public land. Those are just pieces of public land. And like Tyler said, that public land belongs to all the hunters, but also everybody else. And people in Portland and people in Salt Lake City and people in Boise who maybe have never hunted or could really care less about it, they have a say. And like we've talked about, if the currency for the hunting kind of community and culture, and maybe this is a generalization in some senses, is the grip and grin photo that we all know deters non-hunters, and like Brad pointed out, really shines a light on one kind of unfortunate moment in the whole experience, right? Like you wake up at sunrise, you go have your hunt. Most times you don't even kill anything, but there's all the moments that make these adventures epic and make these days spent outside transformative, right? And it's the sunrise, it's the time spent with friends and family, it's the experience, it's the pursuit, it's all of these things, innumerable, qualities that are attached to hunting that we all love and seek out. But it's that one, like Brad said, it's that one image which the hunting industry has propagated, has confirmed that photo is worth something to us because we post it, we publish it, we celebrate it. It's the thumbnail on the video, it's the cover of the magazine, and that doesn't do hunters any good because there are more non-hunters than hunters. And if you just think about the pie and your little slice of the hunting community, the rest of that pie has a voice that's equal to yours in terms of public land. So if your goal as a hunter is to have your grandkids be able to hunt these units and places that you grew up hunting, then it's in your best interest and your kids' best interest to play ball and to understand that what we're after is the opportunity to hunt. What we're after are healthy ecosystems that support and produce healthy populations of animals. So you can go get that elk to fill your freezer, or buck to put on your wall, or whatever it is that you're after. But it's a shared resource that by virtue of being an American belongs to everybody. So it's just this reality that there needs to be an intention to appreciate the fact that we all have an equal stake in this, that public land needs advocates now more than ever because of politics, because of big business, because of development and resource, all these threats to public land. So we need allies. We're not doing ourselves any favors by isolating ourselves and all going onto the same island. And I think, with that, I draw a parallel to the outdoor industry, which is a place that I've spent a lot of, time in my career and being an outdoor recreator, I identify with. And same with, folks on that side of the aisle. Their currency is climbing the big wall, is summiting the mountain, is how fast did you do the PCT, how light was your pack. It's not stewardship. Those places that they're experiencing, whether it's, Denali National Park or the North Cascades, these places were set aside because of their ecological integrity as places with timber, with clean water, with wildlife. They weren't set aside for Instagram. They weren't set aside for overnight backpacking trips. But the outdoor industry has propagated this currency of athletic feat over anything. And just like the hunting industry should realize that it's not just the grip and grin photo, and that groups like Modern Huntsman and publications like ours are aiming to move the needle back towards a place of reverence, back towards a place of dialogue. The outdoor industry is equally, in my opinion, in need of rebranding, because what they're celebrating, the currency that's in that industry, is not propagating stewardship by and large. So I think it's not just a hunting, problem. I think the overarching theme, and we're just addressing it through this one channel, is to tell everybody, hey, these places and these ecosystems need management. They need stewards. They need attention being paid to the whole system, not just, the epic, granite wall or the big buck that, that we have at our knees. So I think it's kind of it's a nod to this deeper, this closer look at stewardship in general.
Yeah, it's an interesting position to be in from the inside. And I think a lot of this comes down to, I think, number one, like you guys all addressed this, a couple realities of the situation. If you want to continue hunting in the future, right, we don't really control our own fate, and that other people will, the larger majority of people don't hunt, and we need to either present ourselves in a way that they'll accept and not vote against our right and privilege to do what we're doing right now. Or if we don't do that, just pragmatically, if we don't do some of the things you're saying, we might lose that privilege. But I think a lot of this comes down to storytelling, because as you were talking about earlier with the grip and grin picture, yeah, I mean, that is, and especially for someone who's just in this, like who hunts all the time, and this is their life, this is what they love to do. A lot of my friends, even myself at one point, never even thought a second about a grip and grin. Like, you were so excited to share, show your buddy this picture, and then once Facebook and Instagram came around, then you want to share it there because, there's so much that went into that photo. Of course, that doesn't always conveyed through a photo, but that there was all those early mornings and all of that work all spring and summer and preparing and hours and hours and hours in the woods and so much emotion and angst and excitement and nervousness, and it all came down to this one thing, and in that one moment it all worked out, and now here you are, and you have this huge smile on your face, and you've never been happier because of all of these things that led up to this great moment, but that many times isn't communicated through that picture. So the question is, though, how do we still share our excitement and celebrate these special moments in our lives, but do it in a way that doesn't negatively impact the bigger community? And so I think to all your points already, it's how do we communicate better? How do we present photography or video or whatever in a respectful manner? And then I think also providing context. A simple thing that I've just started doing now is that whenever I do share an image that has, an animal that I've hunted and killed, try to provide some context or explain what went into it, or why this matters, or why this was a powerful moment, or what happened with that animal and that meal. And lots of times just a little bit of explanation for a non-hunter when they see this, and if it's presented in a respectful way, that is enough to help them connect the dots and not have that kind of drastic gut just feeling of appall. But this is where I'm heading with this. When it comes to some of the context or some of the reasoning behind hunting, or a little bit maybe of how we like to, I think the party line lots of times within the hunting community, when someone says, well, why do you hunt? Or you shouldn't be able to hunt. That's a horrible thing. Why would you do that? Many times one of the party lines, one of like the speaking points is, well, hunting's conservation. By going out there and hunting these animals or whatever, we're paying for all the conservation work, et cetera, et cetera. And Charles, I actually heard you address this issue on another podcast in the past, and I think you had some helpful perspective on this. So I'd be curious if you can speak to this a little bit too, because this is something I felt a lot as well. I wonder and I worry if sometimes we as hunters lean too much on default conservation by saying that, well, we bought our license, so we're contributing to conservation, or we bought a rifle and we got taxed on that, so we're conservationists. Is that enough? I don't think it is, but what are your thoughts, Charles? And what do you think about what the right next step could be? How do we better live up to the conservationist mantle if we want to use that as a rationale for why we should be able to hunt, or why we have worth and value?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And it's one that Ben O'Brien, who has the Hunting Collective podcast that I talked about a few weeks ago or months ago now. But, it's saying that because you hunt, you're a conservationist, is saying that is exactly the same as saying because you pay taxes, you're pro-infrastructure and pro-bridge improvement and pro-median management. I mean, it's an involuntary tax that hunters pay when they buy their license or buy ammunition, whatever it might be. You put some money into the pot. It's not a voluntary, something that you seek out as an individual with a conscious mindset to say, hey, I'm going to pay extra to do this. It's a tax, like I said, just like road improvement or whatever, or, your municipal tax. So I think that's kind of misleading. I think it's kind of just, a low-hanging fruit that everybody likes to pluck. I mean, that's the same thing as saying because you're vegan, you have no impact on the earth. But I would argue there's never been more white-tailed deer in America, that's a fact, than there are today. And if you eat avocados, a lot of them are grown in northern Mexico where monarch butterflies overwinter. So I would argue that eating white-tailed deer in most of the United States is a much better thing to do for the environment than eating avocados. But that's another conversation.
It's a T-shirt.
So, I think to be a conservationist, like Tyler said, it's a life's work. It's a pillar that identifies you on a cellular level and also guides the way that you carve your signature on their land, whatever it might be. That could be carpooling to go hunt. That could be biking to go hunt. That could be, whatever, making your own ammunition or buying a used gun. There's all these things that add to your net impact on Earth, right? Like the worst thing we ever did to this planet was be born, right? So population is a huge problem. So we just need to mitigate the best we can our net impacts. And I think being a conservationist, there are some pretty conspicuous ways to be a hunting conservationist. And maybe that's getting involved with your local Wild Sheep Foundation chapter and helping with some surveys, or helping with trail, maintenance, or just being a mindful, stewardship guided landowner. And maybe that's, that can take place in a number of ways. Maybe that's, managing your forest, doing controlled burns if you have a farm. There's all of these things that I think are just, elements that collectively make you a conservationist. I personally don't think that because you buy a license that makes you a conservationist. I mean, if you go watch a bird, are you an ecologist? Or if you go catch a fish, are you a fish biologist? I'd argue not. So yeah, and in terms of the storytelling aspect, I was working on a shoot down in South Texas a few years ago with a good friend, Ben Masters, who's a great hunter and certainly a conservationist in my mind. And we were working with this outfitting group who did an amazing job of curating those photos. They had clients coming out and hunting whitetail, down in South Texas. And before anybody took any photo, they made sure that the animal was presentable, that the blood was cleaned. Literally, these guys carried a little spray bottle in their truck. And before anybody took a photo, they cleaned the animal up. If there was anything that was, kind of loud in your face, they mitigated it, whether it was putting leaves over the wound or even dirt, and just making sure the tongue wasn't hanging out. They even put a little piece of glass over the eye. I mean, they took it to like such an extreme level, probably more than most would be able to. But it just showed me, like, you wouldn't have expected that. If you brought somebody from suburban Portland down there, they would have been shocked and pleasantly surprised, because what these hunting guides and this outfitting operation knew and realized is that in today's age, the second you publish something on your personal account, you're just like a brand. You're just like a magazine. You're putting content out into the world that is by nature, by default of being published. It's open for commentary. It's open for analysis and critique. And like you brought up, Mark, in the past, it was this thing where you could take a photo, maybe you had, a film camera or whatever, or you just take it on your phone, and it wasn't necessarily going to end up in the, out in the world, representing your community and your culture. So, it's one thing if you take a picture, keep it on your phone, don't publish it, do whatever you want. But I think the second you put it out there, people need to remember that you're speaking on behalf of your community, whether it's, you hunting in your backyard or hunting public land, like you're portraying hunting, and by default, it's up for, people to take a poke at if they feel it's fitting. So I think, the main things that I would say is, take that picture. If that picture of the animal and of that moment where your smile so big it hurts, and it's this really like this culmination of so many days and moments and things coming together, do that. But like you were saying, Mark, there's room for context. You can write something about it. There's room to, pay reverence to the animal. It doesn't have to be the biggest buck. It could be just an animal that goes in your freezer. And for a lot of people, that's a big deal. So I think just realizing that the second it goes out there, you have this opportunity to tell a story as opposed to just putting something out there that's a blank canvas for people to write whatever they want.
Yeah. And I think to what your point was there, I think lots of times what we need to realize is that what we put out into the world, that then many times people, if that's their one, opportunity to see this image or to see something related to hunting, or this is their one contact point, all of a sudden that one thing might represent their entire opinion or perspective on what hunting is or who hunters are. And that's something that I think ties into the next tangent I kind of want to take us down, which is how recently, in particular, with some media frenzies, things that have happened with hunting in Africa have impacted hunting in North America. So something that shows up on CNN that happened on a different continent all of a sudden is causing a huge frenzy here in America and causing people to ask why we're doing something here in Michigan or something, how that might relate to something they saw on TV elsewhere. And I know, Tyler, you've got a lot of experience in this, obviously spending time in Africa. So I'm curious on two things. I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on how what's happening in Africa may or may not impact America. And then secondly, the CNN documentary Trophy. I don't know if you guys saw this, but I watched this film, and while I was watching that, I was thinking about what I just said. I was thinking, wow, how will someone watching this then translate that back to our context here in North America? If you saw that film, can you speak to what your thoughts on that was and how some of the representations of hunting there could impact what's going on? And then, I mean, the Cecil debacle, all the different things going on over there.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on all that?
So
No pressure, Tyler.
Yeah, well, thankfully, I've answered these questions in my head and in my personal life many times. So my first job, I went to USC. I went to University of Southern California, studied photography and film. And my first job out of college was in Tanzania. I moved straight to the bush and filmed hunting safaris for 5 months. And it was a completely transformative experience. And when I came home, the kind of flack that we got, even from friends and family in Texas, of all states, about what I was doing, really showed me how much of a disconnect there was between what people view hunting in Africa to be and what the actual situation is. And so my main story in Modern Huntsman, the first issue, was called Africa Overture. And it's literally my effort to kind of communicate a lot of the topics of conversation I've had to have over the years about how it actually works in Africa. And it's different for every country. And, but for the most part, as Charles says, the best examples are what I focused on with that. And I try to talk about the in-between, right? There's supposed to be, there's government mandated game reserves that are leased to safari companies, and it's in their best interest to effectively manage those areas with conservation efforts. And the government they do censuses, and based on those censuses, they issue a certain number of permits for whatever species that's supposed to adhere to a specific, wildlife management percentage. Well, there's a gradient there of how successful or, accurate those surveys are. There's a gradient of people's ethics of should they shoot that full quota, or is that the government saying, well, we just want more money, so we're going to say there's more animals here than there actually are. So, but the point is that there are some incredible conservation efforts over there, and some of the most successful conservation in Africa, most of, in fact, is done by hunting operations. And, I actually worked for the gentleman who bought the black rhino tag a couple of years ago at the Dallas Safari Club. And the Namibian government issues a rhino tag up for sale every year because there's usually some aggressive bull or sterile bull that's killed other young males. And they auctioned this thing off at the Dallas Safari Club. And they literally had $1 million that they were going to pay for this tag, which was going to go 100% into the rhino conservancy there in Namibia. And the animal rights groups got wind of it, and they sent in death threats, enough to where the FBI had to show up and said that anyone who bids on this rhino hunt, we're going to kill. And so everyone got scared off except for Corey Knowlton, who they eventually did a CNN documentary on. And so when the bidding opened, he bid $350,000, and no one else bid because they were scared that they were going to get their lives ruined by animal rights protagonists or antagonists. And so rather than the bid going the way it was supposed to and $1 million go to rhino conservation, those animal rights groups literally blocked $750,000 from going to rhino conservation. And that's just purely out of ignorance and lack of understanding of the way the situation is. And, the whole Cecil situation, that's a complicated issue. To be fair, that guy was sold a lion license that was not on license. So it was a little bit of an ethics issue with the Game Scout in that country. There's some lessons there. I mean, I think that anyone in their right mind who was going on a lion hunt who saw a radio-collared lion might think twice about if that's a good idea from a publicity standpoint to do something like that. And hunting in itself is a very controversial issue that has like I said, a spectrum of is this a good or bad thing, and it just depends on the area. But the point is that people in the West have developed a very strong emotional attachment to animals that in most cases they've never seen, and often the public opinion of these topics is swayed by whoever yells the loudest. And in most cases, animal rights and anti-hunting groups are the ones that yell the loudest or have the most money, or unfortunately take some of these bloody trophy photos that we all put online and turn those into memes that they then put millions of dollars behind to market and spread across the internet. So the opinion has been swayed in a lot of cases by misinformation. And so at the very least, we are trying to showcase the facts and the realities and the goods and the bads in between. And, we want to focus on the good, but you see the good in context of the bad, and that there are people who aren't out to conserve. They're out to make money. And, in reality, as you applying to the United States, because of the backlash that the administration received, about some of these Africa hunts, it has created a ban in the United States of importation of elephant and lion trophies, harvest, just skins or tusks or anything like that. And so the result of that is that the African governments are now currently losing hundreds of millions of dollars every year that would be directly applied to conservation. And so a lot of these hunting operations in remote areas have shut down, and they've had to give their areas back to the government, which basically means there are now massive game reserves, tens of millions of acres, that are no longer being effectively anti-poaching patrols are not in, they're not being managed anymore. And so poachers are moving in, ivory poachers, meat poachers, tree poachers, which is an often overlooked problem in Africa, is habitat loss. So people who cut down trees or move their cattle into areas that they're not supposed to graze in as the habitat that these animals, African wildlife, need to survive. And with population expansion, habitat destruction, and the increasing conflict of all three of them is created a major problem. And unfortunately, as legislation goes in the United States, so conservation goes in Africa. So it's been a very bad thing. And then beyond that, just the word hunter, right, is being painted as a negative thing, which is part of the reason we chose the term huntsman instead of hunter, because we wanted to get away from the current connotation of the word hunter. And that's not meant to be a gender exclusion for people who might wonder that. It's more of a poetic word that has a gender in the same way that Spanish and Italian words have gender. So it's meant to be sort of a little more of a poetic representation of what the tradition's supposed to be. And we're hoping that by that, we can start to show people that, okay, what you see on the news is not what we're talking about. We're talking about something different. And also what you see on the news isn't quite accurate. This is the deal. And we're trying to be presenters of those facts and perspectives so that hopefully people start to, use a little bit more logic and rationale.
Yeah, I think the Africa example, what happened there around a few of these incidents and how that translated to the media frenzy in America and then law changes, I think that is a great example. And then I think also what recently happened in British Columbia with the banning of grizzly bear hunting. Both of these things were kind of public opinion votes or just catering to an uproar of opinion around something that sometimes isn't fully understood, or there's misinformation around there, or one bad apple painted the whole thing. But I think there are examples that we should look to as to why this whole idea of representing ourselves positively matters. I know probably some people listening, and I've talked about this so much, they might think that I'm just like up here on stage preaching all the time about this, and it maybe gets tiring, and I apologize if that's the case, but I think that we are just seeing now real life impacts that are coming to fruition when we're not careful about how the public perceives what we're doing. Because if we represent things in the wrong way, now things are happening. Privileges and rights are being taken away. Laws are being changed. And, that's just something that, while it's not convenient, sometimes it's a pain in the butt to have to think about all these different things. It simply is the reality that we live in. And I think being mindful in these ways is probably our best step moving forward if we want to continue to be able to live this lifestyle. Now, to what you just mentioned, Tyler, this idea of the modern huntsman or modern hunter, or however people want to take this, what is your guys' vision of what that person is? What's your vision of the future hunter, of the modern future hunter? What does this person and this lifestyle look like going forward if we want to keep this thing going forward?
Sure. I think that this is something that I definitely want Charles to weigh in on as well, because, in the same way that, when we've been talking to brands or sponsors and partners for ongoing issues or web stories, people say, what's your demographic, right? And the answer to that question is not a very succinct, pinpointed, okay, this is the exact type of person we're looking for. This is the exact type of person we're trying to represent. We're more so representing a mindset and a values system and an approach to what we is the best case of ethical hunting and conservation and stewardship. And so whether that's a 10-year-old, kid down in Alabama, or that's a 24-year-old recent college graduate from California, or that's a 65-year-old guy in Minnesota who feels like he's never been able to truly express how he feels, and he feels like his voice gets drowned out with the hunting industry. So I think that realistically, it's more of someone who kind of anything that we've said up to this point, if it resonates with you, that's who we think we're trying to reach here. And we're trying to become a resource and a gathering point for like-minded creatives, hunters, and conservationists, to show that and hopefully carve out a larger piece of the pie for people who think this way, because we feel that they're not accurately being represented in mainstream publications and things like that. And maybe through a trickle-down effect, that the hunting industry or even the mainstream media will see what we're doing and say, hey, you know what? That's honorable and that's virtuous. And we think that deserves for more people to know about it, or more people should order the magazine, or maybe I'll submit a story, even if they're not a hunter. And so, moving forward, we're going to be including stories from non-hunters, non-hunting perspectives. And of course, the lens there is that it needs to be constructive, that we're to, as Charles said, build bridges and bridge the gaps and hopefully reduce conflict. But I think that when it comes down to it, we're hoping to sort of recruit people, and maybe recruit's not the right word, to inspire or enable people who are conservation minded in the sense of, trying to be an active participant in the, in the management, the effective management of landscape, or the preservation of our natural resources and protection of habitats, and having a larger role in that, and just being respectful, ethical hunters.
Did you add anything, Charles?
Yeah, I think just to kind of backpedal here for a second, the topic of Africa and the topic of Cecil and Trophy the film, and how that might inspire or influence some of the ways that hunting is perceived or public lands are managed here in the U.S. One thing I'd add that I think kind of dovetails into your next question about the kind of modern huntsman, who that person is. I always like to bring this up when we talk about Africa, and Tyler and I are constantly talking about Africa because it's not something I know a lot about. But what I do know is that Africa is complex, that each country in Africa has a different suite of rules, of regulations, of successes and failures, of political climates, of economic climates. There are all these things that are affecting the way wildlife and lands and ecosystems are managed, even down to the regional scale. Like, you look at one country, there's going to be areas of success and areas of failure within that country. So I think the really unfortunate kind of phenomena that seems to be quite pervasive in the world, in America as well, is that we are spoon-fed these gross overgeneralizations, many of which are negative. Like read the front page of whatever your local newspaper is, and most of the stories are negative. Most of them, are picking something that triggers a response. They want to feed you the 7-word byline that makes your heart race or makes you want to cry or whatever, or makes you scared. I mean, that's the currency of media. And for hunting, it's been destructive. Like these films are made to piss people off. These films are made to evoke a response, not generally to say, the problem's a little bit, or the situation, the landscape's a little bit more complicated than we really understand. And this is the best that we understand about this one aspect of this broader narrative. And I think that is what we are also trying to point out, is that these stories, hunting is complicated. Wolves exist in North America, but the reality of wolves is different in BC compared to Idaho. Like wolves, there are some wolves in California, but their whole situation, the political climate associated with them, their ecological impact is very different than wolves in Yellowstone. And wolves in Yellowstone are incredibly different than wolves 20 miles outside of Yellowstone. So we, society, the public, is constantly reminded falsely that because we understand what happened to wolves in Yellowstone, we understand wolves in general. And that is really unfortunate because the world is complicated. Hunting is complex. There are hunters that are amazing people that we at Modern Huntsman will elevate and lift up and celebrate and shine a light on. But there are also people who we won't, because they have a lot of room, to improve, just like politicians, just like your local banker, just like a used car salesman. Like any sect of society has people who are stellar humans and people who, have some room to improve. And we're all, we all have faults and we all have places to improve. Nobody's perfect. But to say all hunters are good or all hunters are bad is misleading. To say all politicians are good or bad is misleading. And to say Africa is just one, homogenous place, or hunting in North America is just one homogenous kind of landscape is misleading. And I think that's something that we should continue to inject into these conversations, because somebody will ask Tyler or me or whoever about hunting in Africa, and they probably think they have their head pretty well wrapped around the question, trophy hunting is bad. Well, like Tyler said, there's examples where trophy hunting is actually pretty benign and good. But there's also examples of trophy hunting that's probably pretty, could use some improvement, or is maybe not as sensitive, or is actually maybe not, ecologically beneficial. And that's the kind of minutia that I think that we want to point out. And while pointing that out, say, like, here are examples of this in a wonderful light that we can all draw inspiration from, and that we hope the next generation of hunters embodies. And I think that, in my opinion, is the modern huntsman. It's somebody who realizes that if you want to harvest a big elk, there needs to be a healthy watershed with healthy soil and a healthy fire regime and a healthy invertebrate community. And these animals that we pursue are directly a reflection of healthy ecosystems. So if you're big on, elk, for example, your best friend should be the guy who's studying the aspen in the riparian corridor. And we need to realize that all of these things are connected, and that there's a lot of things we don't know. I mean, that's what I love about ecology and science, is that science exists under the understanding that we don't know everything, and that science is always improving. And that when we say something in the scientific world, we say it with an understanding that there is a great possibility that we're wrong, or that we don't know everything. And I think with hunting and Modern Huntsman, we want to point out these complexities and point out rooms for growth. And also, we're not in the business of saying like every person is the best that there ever could be in the hunting world. Like, we're here to celebrate the people that we should all look up to. And I think that should go with, any of the topics, whether, like I said, it's Africa or trophy hunting or whatever. There's great examples and there's examples that aren't so great. And there's always improvement to be made.
Yeah.
I think to add on to that, I'm sorry, Mark, I was just going to add on real quick. I think to add on to that too, this is kind of the beauty of storytelling, right? Is it's not a presentation of what's right versus what's wrong, or here's how to live better, or the top 10 ways to improve your game or whatever. It's a presentation of something that goes far beyond what is fact, and it goes into the soul level of what you define truth to be. And so, our intention through everything we do, whether it be through media, whether it be through conversations, whether it be through, being a part of a topic of interest, is simply to present a narrative that may or may not have been heard before, may or may not have been presented before. And that in doing so, we give the listener or the viewer or the reader the ability to interpret that in their own frame of reference. Because at the end of the day, the thing that's most polarizing is somebody who believes that they are the supreme truth, and they're presenting their supreme truth as fact. And we know that, we can do without much of the polarizing media outlets in America and go towards something that's less sensationalized and more normalized. And when you start to normalize the conversation, allow people to make their own decisions and to see facts and figures, but also see somebody's heart and soul behind it, it gives you the opportunity to actually feel something and be convicted by it, as opposed to having to feel like, you are on the outside if you don't participate in this, or you're wrong if you don't, or you're right if you don't. But instead, give them a reason to feel and to believe in something.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up too. I think that is so important to look at this, look at a lot of these issues we've been talking about, and not in a polarizing kind of way, but in a let's have a dialogue kind of way. Let's be inclusive. Let's better understand each other. Let's look at the complexities and the nuance here. And to your earlier point, so much of what's going on in the larger world could maybe be improved a little bit if we just all got a little bit better at doing that. But another thing I want to make sure is known, and I might be speaking for you guys here a little bit, but I think it's important to note that, even if you do enjoy, the traditional hunting media and hunting TV shows, and you like the hunting magazines, and, I watch and read and participate in a lot of that stuff myself too. There's nothing wrong with enjoying some of that stuff, but then also agreeing with some of the ideas that are being presented by you guys in Modern Huntsman. I don't think it's an either or. I think it's, hey, here's some different things we can take from this aspect. Here's some things to think about on that side of things. I think, we're all part of this community. I think what you guys are doing a really nice job of is shining a light on certain aspects of things and saying, hey, let's have a conversation around this. Is this the best way to present things? Are there some different ways that we can talk about this? And I think that is a powerful thing. And I would want to make sure that someone who, I don't want anyone to be turned off by these ideas because they feel like they don't fit into this little narrow box. Even if you come from Southern Michigan and love watching your Whitetail Freaks DVD, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yes.
You can also, be interested and intrigued and curious about, learning about some of these different ways of looking at hunting or different ways to talk about hunting. Or I think we share a lot of the same common core beliefs and virtues. We appreciate many of the same things. I think it just comes down to how we then communicate those things, and sometimes just take a second to think about these things. And what I like about what you guys are doing is the fact that you're putting this this platform out there that presents an opportunity to see some different ways of thinking through these things that I think is valuable. So that's a good thing, I think, for the future of hunting, because if we're all just talking the same language all the time and we're stuck in that echo chamber, we never have that room or that incentive to grow or evolve. And I think, as far as I see it, we're going to have to continue to evolve if we want to keep wildlife and wild places and hunting a part of the future in this country, this world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to your point of, I'm glad you brought that up, because, in no way are we saying that, other media or magazines are irrelevant. It's more of that we've felt that people that aren't being represented in those shows or in those magazines, that we're trying to give a voice. And in a lot of situations, with the story, we're trying to focus it more on, rather than the end result, right, of the trophy or the buck or whatever, more about the individual experience along the way, which is what you mentioned in terms of context and the scenario and how much work went into that. And where, the mainstream, the other magazines, and those are hyper focused on a specific demographic, right? People who are more interested in ballistics or, aero performance or, whitetail freaks or whatever that may be. And that media is intended for those types of people who are very interested in that specific type of information. Our product is much more focused on an outward facing message, right? We are trying to help bridge the gap between, the two communities. And, not everyone's going to want to have difficult conversations. And, there may be some people who hear what we're saying and they're like, oh, that's cool. Good luck with that. I'm not necessarily going to participate, but I respect what you're doing, kind of thing. And that's fine. We're just trying to, make access to the hunting world a little easier for a non-hunter. And we're just trying to do it in a different tone that's a little more approachable, that isn't so specific. I mean, for instance, the Journal of Mountain Hunting, they produce an amazing magazine, but it's so specific because it's like very, very hardcore training, technical mountain hunting that I wish I could do, but I'm nowhere near the shape to be able to do something like that. And that's aspirational for me, but that may not be necessarily relevant for me reading. I may not understand it, or I may not get it, because that just doesn't necessarily suit my lifestyle at this moment. And so I think that, it's important to make that distinction, that there's, it's all part of the same mission here. We're all moving in the same direction. We're just trying to take a little different of a tone in ours.
Yeah. So speaking of the fact that your project here it's a little more outward facing, it's a little bit more about helping present hunting to new people in a way that's a little bit more approachable for many folks. So I'm curious then, given that lens that you guys have been looking at hunting through, and through probably a lot of the conversations you've had with people that have been curious about hunting maybe but haven't dove into it yet, I'm curious if you can give us, back to traditional media, can you give us a quick, like a 1, 2, 3 of something that we hunters can be thinking about, maybe a couple different ways we can do a better job of connecting with new hunters or communicating about what we're doing to new hunters, if we want to have some of these difficult conversations, or if we want to bring someone into the fold. Do you guys have a couple pieces of advice based on your experience that we could take?
Yeah, I've got a quick one, and then I'll let Charles chime in, because I'm sure he's got different ones, which is great because we have a variety of perspectives. For me, I think that what's been really well received in context of non-hunters, and even people like vegans who are against it for what they perceive to be moral reasons against a big beef industry or a poultry industry, and that's the context of food, right? Hunting for food or eating what you kill. And so I think that that's something that a lot of us who do that take for granted, and how people don't even consider that that's a possibility for them, that you can go out and harvest your own food. And so I think that that's something we're really trying to focus on, because even shows, cooking shows, or things like Chef's Table, people accept the context of hunting when it's viewed through the lens of cuisine. And so that's something that I've made sure that I've communicated in some of my conversations, possibly in difficult topics or things like that, is that connection to food, right? And I think that beyond that, it's a lot of times people get asked, why do you hunt? And that's a hard question to answer. But I think that that's an important question to ask yourself. And whether or not you need to justify yourself to somebody, I don't necessarily know if you need to, but I think that it's important to look inward and really kind of ask ourselves why we do that. Why is it important? Is it an instinct? Well, is that the only reason we do it? Surely it's more than that. And so we're attempting to be able to communicate a variety of those reasons why people hunt. And ideally, we're focusing on the ones that we feel to be are a little more exemplary or, adhering to virtues.
To that, words and images are the things that stick with people most. We know this to be intrinsically true, and I think that we've almost bastardized Instagram in a sense of, or we've bastardized imagery because of Instagram and because of photo sharing technology, that we've almost I think Charles put it so in such a good light, and I want to frame it differently, that Instagram, every time you put something out on social media, you're casting a vote for something. Not only are you presenting a topic that people can have commentary on, but you're also casting a vote. And because of the normalization of being able to just, cast your vote through imagery and share that with the world, and now you have a public opinion towards something and people have access to that, it means a lot. And I think that we discount it severely, because it's our channel, it's our page. We should be able to do whatever we want, and that's true. That's absolutely correct. But you now have given access to people to be able to content, and also in conversation or in sharing, maybe an experience that you had hunting on social media through the written word or spoken word. It matters. People are listening to that all the time, and so that's a huge point for me, that as coming from somebody who was formerly not in this space, felt excluded and intimidated by this industry. One of my points of contention was I was afraid to say to people that I was a non-hunter. I was afraid to talk to hunters and say that I wasn't a hunter because I felt like I'd be pushed out of the club. And to be able to have a tone of voice that is more inviting, that speaks to, this is not us versus you. This is not, you can't come into our club, but instead, this is something that we want you to be a part of. I want to share this experience with you, whether it's I want to take you in the field, or whether it's I want to show you some pictures of my last hunt. I'm so proud of, X, Y, Z, whatever animal I harvested, or whether it's, I want to show you how I prepared this dish. That's something that we have the opportunity to not just share, but get people excited and feel included about. So I think that's one thing that ultimately, in a mass media setting, all of us collectively are the voice of hunting. I don't think we need to take that lightly. Modern Huntsman is not going to change the industry. Beretta and Filson and Sitka and brands, and we are not going to change the industry. It's the people. Right? It's all of us collectively. We're the ones who do this. And so if we can have a much more sensitive and thoughtful tone of voice and not change how we do things or the approach of the actual hunt, but how we communicate it, I think that's the ultimate key to being able to convict and persuade that perception away from what the majority of non-hunters perceive it to be now into what the majority of hunters actually feel it to be.
Yeah. Would you add anything, Charles?
Yeah, I think, two things that come to mind when I think about qualities of hunters, and that I think and by, through the collective lens, we think the next generation to benefit from. I think about people like my friend Adam Foss, who's a celebrated bow hunter, one of my best friends, just a brilliant creative as well. But, go walk around the mountains with somebody like him, and you are brought into this world where he's reading the wind and looking at tracks and reading the markings on the trees, and just he is telling you this picture of an ecosystem through a hunter's eyes, somebody who's spent decades, really studying the environment. And for everybody out there who's a hunter, when you succeed and harvest something, when it goes from hunting to harvesting, that bridge, that portal that you go through, that hinges upon your ability to read the woods, to be a woodsman, or be a naturalist, or to be fluent in your backyard or the rhythms of the places you hunt. And that, I think, is something that's really exciting and something that's often overlooked. When you think about teaching your kid to hunt, or if you have kids, you take your kids hunting, you're telling them about all the things that might predispose them to a successful hunt. And those are the things that I'm sure you look in their eyes and you get so excited about seeing them loving the creek and the forest and, making an owl call to stir up a turkey. There's all these things that are part of hunting that I think are really beautiful and amazing and inspiring, and that make you a good hunter, but also make you a steward and make you somebody who's an advocate and somebody who will speak up for those places, those wild ecosystems that don't have a voice and need them now more than ever. So I think, and that goes into food. I'm looking at, a mount of an animal I harvested a few years ago. And some of my favorite memories of that hunt have been the barbecues I've had. Like the other day, my fiance and I moved into a new place and we had friends over and we ate some of the elk that we harvested. And that barbecue was so fun, being able to share food that you worked your butt off for through snowstorms and through, all these crazy events and near opportunities. And then you get to sit down with your friends and family and share a meal. And with that meal comes all this reverence and comes all this positive energy and excitement. I mean, those are the things that get us fired up, right? Like the photo of the animal will always be something to remember, but there's all the experiences that radiate and orbit from that really make us addicted and passionate about what we're doing. And I think that's such a beautiful element that I know at Modern Huntsman we want to celebrate. And like Tyler said, in terms of PR and storytelling, cuisine is a wonderful vehicle to do that. And it's also something that everybody has in common. Everybody's got to eat, and everybody loves knowing a little bit about their food. And hunting gives us a great opportunity to talk about that.
Yeah. Something you said a couple times there, Charles, brings me to another question that I often have been asking people. And it kind of fits in very nicely with a lot of what we've been talking about, that being the importance of our words. And I'm curious, you mentioned a couple times that you harvested an animal. And I'm really interested in people's perspective on this word, using the word that they harvested an animal or they killed an animal. There's some people that say that when you say the word kill, you killed an animal, that's too aggressive, that's too harsh, that's going to turn people off, that's going to scare people away. And so they say harvest. And then there's other people that say kill because, no, that's the truth of what's happening. That is the reality of what's happening here. I'm going to honor the truth and honor the animal by saying that. On the other hand, they feel that harvest, then by saying harvest, it's like you are framing wildlife as a crop that you're just growing and taking, and that's disrespectful. So those are these two different perspectives on those two words that I often hear. And I don't know where I stand on it, but I'm really curious to hear different people's opinions on it. I'm curious, Charles, is this something you've thought about and you actively choose to use the word harvest for one of these reasons or something else? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think about it as like the same, analogous to you can be driving and you can be speeding, but to speed, you have to drive, right? So to kill, you can just kill something. It doesn't necessarily mean you're harvesting it. But harvesting implies that there's that second step. There's that amendment to the initial function of killing, or in the analogy of driving, right? Like that's the first entry point. And, you might be driving one day and run over a rabbit. You're not harvesting that rabbit. You just killed that rabbit. Harvesting is a driver and incentive to do what you're doing. And I think harvest also, evokes a sense of reverence and appreciation and understanding for that process. Now, people talk about the second hunt. You go bow hunting, you got to find the animal, and then there's the tremendous amount of work that comes with packing it out, especially if you're hunting up in the mountains. Like that's a huge part of the adventure. And, thinking about harvesting food, I mean, I grew up with vegetable gardens. For everybody out there listening who's ever tried to grow strawberries, like when you finally get your second year strawberry plants coming back in and you have 60 strawberries, each one means so much because you put all that effort into getting that little strawberry that the slugs didn't get and, weren't picked off by a bird. And there's just that extra bit of energy attached to it. And I think harvesting embodies all those extra adjectives, those extra elements that come from, yes, the animal died, but it's being harvested because for me at least, I'm pursuing these animals to eat and to share with friends and family. And I think there's a distinction there, right? Like some people kill things and some people harvest things. And I think harvest, for me, is the right word.
That's an interesting perspective and one I hadn't thought about in that way, and that harvest to you connotates not just the act of the killing, but it's also then the intention behind it, how you're going to use it to eat, etc. That's an interesting perspective on it. Tyler or Brad, would you guys care to weigh in on that at all?
Yeah, I think it's also a matter of context, right? If we're all in a room full of hunters and you're not as worried about what people are thinking of what you're saying, you could, in a casual conversation, you may say you killed it. But in the venture we're in, which is trying to be diplomats of what we feel to be ethical hunting, we're trying to do what we can to make sure that we minimize, conflict. And I think that you're right, the term killing, even though, yes, that's what it is one of those things where people might take that the wrong way, or it might offend them. And, then comes the age-old question, do you need to worry about what other people think? And it goes back to what we discussed earlier, that in certain cases, yeah. So, do you need to watch what you say all the time? I would advise it. It's not necessarily, going to be a game changer, but I think that what Charles is referring to is more of a matter of respect. And if you're saying it out of habit, or you're saying it out of like, oh, well, I've done it so many times, so it doesn't really mean anything anymore, then that's one thing. But using a different word, or if you say the word kill, and there's a sense of remorse, that's a different thing. But I think if it's more just like going through the motions and like, I killed 4 deer because I kill 4 deer every year, and it's not really exciting to me anymore, then that's where I would kind of see a problem in that. Just desensitization. And so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I use it in different contexts, or, you could say reap, so either in Ridge Reaper, I mean, people use that term as well. So I don't know. I think it's more of just a matter of the intention of you saying it and the audience you're, saying it to.
And there's a certain luxury that most industries can afford, camping or hiking, biking, a lot of the outdoors culture. There doesn't have to be as much sensitivity because the stakes are lower, right? You don't have the same effect. While you do have an effect on the surroundings, you don't have as much effect when you are camping, hiking, biking. When you are taking the life of an animal, we don't live in the same luxury of being able to be as loose with our words. So, to both Tyler and Charles' point, it's a matter of what is the terminology in the right context that's going to allude that there is a point of respect that you have when you're around with your buddies, like Tyler said. Absolutely, man. Use the lingo that makes the most sense and that's going to bring you closer to your community, because you all know and you all get it. But when people don't get it, or there's some contention there, it's worth considering to be able to, watch what you say, understand who's listening, and ultimately that there is an impact that you're leaving behind with every word that you say. So whatever the word may be that you choose to say, I hope that it would be something that people understand what you're implying, not just what you're saying.
Yeah. I think this comes down to, I think what all three of you mentioned kind of, I think, relates to maybe what the moral of this entire podcast is. The moral of this story, I feel like, is just being mindful, being thoughtful about what we're doing, how we're doing it, how we're communicating about it, and the nuance there. And I think you guys all have really interesting points and perspectives on that one example there, that word there. To your point, Brad, it's a heavy word. It's a heavy idea. What we're doing here, the stakes here, are not trivial in any way. This isn't like shooting a basketball at the hoop. What we're doing is trying to take an animal's life, which is inherently as serious of a thing as there can be. So I think the way we think about and talk about these things should mirror that seriousness.
Absolutely.
I've got two final quick questions for you guys. The second question I'll tell you is going to be that I'm interested in what is coming down the line for Modern Huntsman. So I am gonna, you guys can be thinking in the back of your mind about what we have to look forward to with the next issue, all that kind of stuff. But before that, what I'm curious about is I would love, just based on hearing from you guys and hearing and seeing your work in previous places, I'm guessing you've got some quality taste in media as far as books or films, anything like that. So I'm curious if you have any books or films or resources that you'd recommend to us, to whether it be related to hunting or the outdoors or conservation, anything within this realm that we've been talking about that you'd recommend. And I don't know, Charles, would you want to start with a couple of recommendations?
Yeah, absolutely. Two books that I really enjoy are The Great Animal Orchestra by Bernie Krause. And it's a book about the ecology of sound. And it's something that I know a lot of hunters are already thinking about because sound, out hunting. But it's this book that for me really changed the way I looked at ecosystems and looked at just the natural world. And Bernie Krause, he's got a great TED Talk on it. He's kind of this ecology Jedi who's got a lot figured out, and he tells a story in a pretty unique way. So that's one book. And then, another book that really is just like a timeless classic that was really galvanized my passion and interest in natural history and storytelling is A Sand County Almanac by Aldo Lee. It's kind of one of the grandfathers of conservation. And those are two books that just, that are really, really inspiring and well done. In terms of films, I think one that selfishly I'll plug because I worked on it, but also because it was a film that really opened my eyes to complex narratives, is a film called Island Earth. It's a film that was directed by Cyrus Sutton, a great friend, one of the first people I worked for after grad school, diving into the creative world. He's just a really talented, he's an Emmy Award winner, pro surfer, but also an amazing reporter and kind of objective journalist. And Island Earth is a film you can find on iTunes, probably some other places, but I do know it's on iTunes. And it explores GMOs and kind of the landscape of genetically modified organisms, specifically plants. And it kind of takes place in Hawaii, where a lot of the big chemical companies, the Dows and Monsantos, do a lot of their research. And yet, I think it does a really good job of painting a fair brushstroke across a really complicated topic, kind of like hunting or politics or whatever. So yeah, that would be kind of my shameless plug for Island Earth, but it's a film that I think will definitely open your eyes and kind of highlight those complexities and the fact that there's not one easy answer to some of these bigger problems.
Interesting. I have not seen that, but we'll have to check it out. And to your Sand County Almanac recommendation, I can't echo that enough. We've talked about it a lot on past episodes, so hopefully if you haven't yet, this is another reminder to check that one out. And it's funny you mentioned that. I just got a tweet yesterday from someone. They tweeted at me and said that they went into Barnes & Noble and went up to the counter after hearing us talk about it and had asked if they had a Sand County Almanac, and the lady or person, whoever it was, just got this really huge smile on their face and this quizzical look, and they're like, that is the weirdest thing, because literally just moments before she went and got the one lone copy of a Sand County Almanac from out back and put it on the shelf, thinking how no one's gonna pick this up, and just seconds later someone asked for it. So that was
no way.
Yeah, kind of a strange, interesting circumstance. So it was meant to be. That Eldo was going to find his way to someone else's mind. So, Tyler, do you have any recommendations?
I do. So I unfortunately haven't been able to read as much the last few months with travel and us trying to get things going forward. But a couple months ago, I finished a Roosevelt trilogy. It's a 3-part book or 3-book series. massive. The first one was called The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt. The second one was called Theodore Rex, and the last one's Colonel Roosevelt. But the second one in particular, Theodore Rex, was about his active presidency, and it really goes into a little more detail about his views of conservation and how he came about them through touring around the United States and seeing areas of what used to be wilderness that were just being decimated. And he really felt the need to try to make it stop. And so it really kind of goes into that and how he put that into action legislative wise. And then, after his presidency, some of the hunting safaris he went on. And it was really interesting to me to see that even back in, 1914 or 1918, whatever it was, that the people were still giving crap about. And I had no idea. I just assumed that back then hunting was much more widely accepted. And while it may be on a larger scale, but there was still a general public consensus that questioned some of these, bigger game quests. And that was really interesting to me. And it definitely gave a little bit more of a perspective into his conservation philosophy and how it sort of led us to where we're at today. So I'd highly recommend that. In terms of films, I don't have a specific film that I have watched recently of note. However, Charles and I and Brad are working together to make the Modern Huntsman site be a pretty hefty resource for conservation films and hunting films and films that promote and discuss topics like Charles was talking about. And so here in the next few months, we're going to be releasing a lot more of those on the site in an effort to kind of expand the conversation and be able to showcase more work of directors and cinematographers and people who are just doing great things in the film world. Because currently, to watch a lot of these films, you got to go to 15 different YouTube channels, or you got to go to a film festival, or you got to follow the right person on Instagram. And so we want to try to be sort of a collection and a resource for all that type of work. So check back soon, and hopefully we'll have a lot more of those.
And the film trailer that we just posted last week, and I'll plug Charles here, was his film that he produced with Max Lowe and Forrest Woodward, Sky Migrations. We posted the trailer on our page, and it is absolutely fantastic. I would highly recommend everybody start. Yeah, it really is.
We didn't plan that.
We did not plan that. But no, there are a vast number of creatives in this space who are writers or photographers or filmmakers, or like Charles, who are by trade an ecologist, but by value a storyteller and can apply their learning into a way that people, both hunters, non-hunters, not to just get too general, but that folks can digest and interpret the work and the findings that they've come up with and really get inspired by it. Charles is a ridiculous storyteller.
Great.
I'll Venmo you that $6 for saying that, Brad.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah, and to echo what you recommended a second ago there, Tyler, to Theodore Roosevelt histories, you cannot go wrong with learning more about what that guy did. He had his hands on so much of what we now have as an amazing inheritance, whether it be our public lands or wildlife populations and game laws that allow them to be sustainable, or the fair chase, the ethics and morals that we have around how we pursue game. He was involved in so much of that stuff, and I haven't read Theodore Rex yet, but I have read many, including one I'd recommend, The Wilderness Warrior, which it's a heavy one. It's a tough one to get through if you're not really devoted to wanting to know everything about Theodore Roosevelt related to the wild environment and conservation. But if you are really interested in that, it goes so into depth of everything that he was involved with, and you'll walk away from that book knowing a lot, and you'll appreciate what he did a lot more. Another one that I'm actually reading right now is called The Naturalist, which is another look at Theodore Roosevelt from a natural history standpoint, but a little more focused on his experiences in nature and his focus on understanding them from a natural history perspective, from how to observe, collect, and even send some of these specimens to museums and different things, but it really goes into detail about a lot more of his outdoor experiences and ventures. And through those stories, it does talk a little bit about some of the politics and some of the different things he achieved in office. But that's an interesting perspective too. And then if you're a hunter and you want to just understand TR from a hunting perspective, his books that he wrote are really fantastic too. He was a really great writer. Not him, he was great at so many things. But The Wilderness Hunter is a great one, and Hunting Trips of a Ranchman, I think, is another that are great, really compelling, interesting stories that he tells that really put you right back there in western North Dakota in 1884 and understanding what that was like. So those are all additional recommendations I'd throw out there. So,
well, just to add to that topic, I'm not sure if you actually got to read Volume 1 of Honor Huntsman yet, but we have the added benefit of having the guidance of one Simon Roosevelt, who's actually TR's great-great-grandson. I met him a few years ago and sort of in the beginning stages of this venture, and he, at the right time I asked if he would want to help advise us, and he said, "I'll do you one better. I'd like to not only advise, but be a contributor." So we have him as a columnist, and he's definitely having a major hand in helping us helping guide us in the right direction, and sort of adhering to some of those principles, but then sort of modernizing them where they need to be modernized. And so he's definitely somebody who's had a very large behind the scenes role doing. So it's an honor for sure.
I did see that, and I thought that was very cool. So that's a perfect segue then to my next question, which is, what should we be looking forward to in the next issue and in the future, and where can people find all this stuff, I guess? And I don't know if, Tyler, if you want to take the first stab at that, or anyone else.
Sure. So I think that right now we're really trying to move more towards a subscription model. We're releasing 2 a year. We're hoping 2019 to release 3 a year. But right now we're moving into Volume 2, which we're hoping to release, in the fall, probably in September, October area, somewhere in there, depending on how hard of a time Charles and I have wrangling all these contributors. But that is going to be themed around public lands. And I think it's a very important issue right now to discuss on several levels. But we also expanding a little more into the international arena. So we had a lot of feedback from people who ordered the magazine and said, "Hey, are you going to do stories besides the United States?" And the answer to that is yes. We're going to start to scale that up a little bit in the next issue, but in the context of public land, because we are blessed with a vast area of public land in the United States that hardly anywhere else in the world has. And so what are the situations like in other parts of the world where that doesn't exist? What are the pros? What are the cons? What can we take away from that as Americans with this inheritance of a wealth of lands? And then what current issues, whether they're political or legislative or local, are imperative right now, and what do we need to know about them? And then what, if anything, can we do about them? So, not only are we trying to present topics, but wherever possible, we want to present sort of some action items on how people could be involved or improve the situation in some way or another.
Would you guys add anything else, Charles or Brad?
That's a clear no, I think. Tyler nailed it.
Yeah. Well, Charles, I think, and Charles is, your background is a little more related to the ecology side and helping us bridge the gap with, as you said, across the aisle. And so maybe talk a little bit about our strategy there.
Yeah, I think, one of the many drivers that I think are kind of shaping issue 2 for us is thinking about storytellers and kind of staples in the hunting community that will further our ability to build bridges. And one of the things that we're going to do is obviously, be connecting and working with some of these household names in the hunting industry, because they have so much to share. They have so much history with public lands. They have so many, rich and smart perspectives that will add a lot to the broader narrative. But we also want to include voices. We also will include voices and stories of people who have a hand and a foot in kind of different worlds, whether it's the confluence of outdoor recreation and hunting, or, even surf culture and hunting, or food culture and hunting. And we want to tell stories that bring us back to the essence of Modern Huntsman and bring us back to the essence of issue 2, public lands. But we also want to point out and really celebrate the diversity of people who all have a stake in public lands and who, have hunting as this kind of common thread. And hunting, as we've talked about on this podcast, is this pretty dynamic, activity, mindset, approach. And we aim to paint it in as diverse of a light as it is. So we're really excited to kind of bring some, maybe not atypical, but some just kind of some different voices to the table that'll make the whole issue that much more rich and holistic.
Well, it sounds like, based off of what the both of you shared, that we've got a lot to look forward to with issue 2. I can attest to the fact I have the first volume here in my hands. It is a beautiful piece of work. You guys really, just the physical nature of it itself is beautiful, but then also the content. I think you guys did a great job of curating both thoughtful stories and articles and beautiful photography. I mean, it is definitely I don't know if it's a pleasure to behold. It is something that really is a really well done piece of media related to what we all love so much, which is hunting and garnering our food from wild places. So I'm glad that you guys are doing this, that you're sharing a different way to think about and communicate and interact with hunting. I think it's needed, it's worthwhile, and I've been enjoying it. So I'm looking forward to what you guys have up next. And Brad, if people want to pick up a copy of Volume 1, or if they want to subscribe for future issues, or if they want to follow what you guys are doing online, where can they do all this stuff?
Yep, you can go to our website at modernhuntsman.co, and to subscribe, you can either just click on the little button right there in the center, or it's modernhuntsman.co/subscribe. And as always, people can check us out on Instagram at Modern Huntsman, or on our Facebook page.
Terrific. Well, we will link to all that stuff. And I really enjoy this conversation, guys. Thank you for taking the time to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks for having us.
And that will do it. Quick reminder, if you haven't yet, we would love it if you could leave a rating or review on iTunes. It would be amazing if you could subscribe to this podcast there as well, and subscribe to the Wired to Hunt YouTube channel. Lots coming up there. I just published my first piece of content documenting my 2017 hunting season, talking through the first hunt of the year. And later this week, I'll have a new video coming out that talks about my plan and what happened there in late October when I went for my next strike after this deer called Holyfield. So that might be interesting. You can check that out over on YouTube. Otherwise, just want to thank all of you for joining us for this podcast, for tuning in, for considering these different ideas and perspectives. I found it really interesting. I hope you did too. And until next time, I hope you'll stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins.